right. Welcome, everybody. We had a little intro music. And Bob actually got to meet the guy that wrote that intro music for us last week. I'm Eric Hansen. Bob is Bob Morton, former Notre Dame offensive lineman, current quote-a-minute guy for our Into the End Zone show. And we are going to be taking your questions live once we react and overreact to Notre Dame's 31-13 victory over Georgia Tech in Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So we're going to start with Bob's opening impressions, and please keep this under 20 minutes.
We'll try and keep it under 20 minutes. Listen, I feel like it was just a strong game, front to back. I feel like there were obvious hiccups, but it never felt like Notre Dame was really in any danger. It felt like we executed a game plan pretty well offensively, although there were some hiccups in some different position groupings. And then defensively, I mean, what do you expect from an Al Golden defense, even without maybe not even arguably, our number one player with Ben Morrison out for the year? It just seemed to be a highlight of man-to-man defense in the back end and just a constricting pass rush coming from the front seven that just kept getting home. Riley Mills, piling up a couple of sacks himself. So it just felt like Notre Dame controlled this one from, let's say, end of the first quarter through the end of the game.
Okay. And I put this so that you can see visually, send us some questions to answer during the show. I already said it once. Now we will let you visualize that and come up with your great questions. For me, it was really interesting because I don't know that Notre Dame is ever going to master the art of starting really strong. It feels like they're going to be a little bit clumsy, but they've certainly mastered the art of recovery, and they seem to adjust very well, settle into the game, and get into it. I was really impressed with Georgia Tech's backup quarterback, Zach Pyron, early in the game, and then Notre Dame kind of figured out how to get to the Georgia Tech offense. I mean, they absolutely smothered Georgia Tech's running game, and I think that was they didn't want Georgia Tech to be able to lean into that. Eventually, they were able to get to Zach Pyron. I mean, this is a team. They got sacks, they got turnovers. This is a team that had one sack given up for 1 yard all year and 2 turnovers all year, and Notre Dame was able to pressure Georgia Tech into some really crazy things. And then the special team stuff. I know Yoakum made one of 2 field goals. He certainly made one over 40 yards, but the fake punt, the fake field goal, the blocked field goal, tackling Georgia Tech when they could have turned that into a fake field goal, their first one, I thought was all really positive things. So, Bob, as you look at this, I think the spotlight always kind of eventually will drift to Riley Leonard. Did you see enough out of him today to make you feel like, okay, this was another step forward for him as a complete quarterback?
Absolutely. So I thought it was a big step forward for him. We've got a question. My man Cameron, was Riley's interception a bad throw, bad route? How about the recovery after the mistake? Listen, I think you'd love to see on that play Bo Collins finish running the route. He clearly gave up, but he was completely covered with a safety over top. So I don't like the read of throwing into that double coverage, especially when you've got some momentum on the drive. But the step forward for Riley Leonard was after that play, he went 13 of his next 14. You know what I mean? Like, he really controlled the offense. I get really excited when I watch our new kind of budding RPO run pass option game where you see him, fake a handoff. He has an option to run the zone read pull, but then he can also just snap a throw, usually on like a quick slant or a quick seam route. And we had 4 or 5 of those, in that first half that really changed the momentum of the game. So I saw a lot from him. What I would like to see him grow in, where I think he needs to grow for us to continue to be successful, is when the pocket inevitably breaks down or when he breaks the confines of the pocket. Can Riley's eyes continue to be downfield for that intermediate or deep route? I think, on the 4th down, I didn't mind the 4th down play that we did not get the first down. The second he felt pressure, there was no doubt in his mind he was going to try and run for that first down, and he was constricted. So there's got to be a receiver, a tight end, somebody who would have at least a step on their DB to be able to fit that ball in. I'd like to see that pass be something that could help us on those later downs. But that's the next step in his evolution.
My question is, where was the center pass in this game? We did not see a pass to the center. And I have to tell you, Bob, when we had coordinator interviews on Tuesday night, I'm usually hanging out with Mike Denbrock, and I mentioned to him that you texted me during the
of course
the Stanford game on that, and he goes, "Was Bob mad that I didn't throw one to him when I coached him?"
Listen, as much as Pat Coogan was living my dream, I'm very okay that my dream never became a reality, because as I've aged, I've become more mature in my thinking to realize that if that ball would have come into my hands, I would have panicked. I don't know what I would have done, but I'm very glad that a center on Notre Dame's line got some love, and I'm glad that the offensive coordinator got to think of me in the week to follow.
So let's look at the offensive line, because, again, that's a part of the game. Unless they're playing really great or really poorly, I think people kind of drift and their eyes move to other things other than yours, but I mean just like normal people. And I'm wondering how you thought they did collectively, and maybe who stood out for you and maybe who struggled on the offensive line.
Yeah, I'll say this. I actually think our success running the ball today was more a result of our scheme than our performance as an offensive line. I felt like across the board, our front five were not as aggressive and dominant as I like to see them. They were pretty soft in the running plays. I felt like every time we were trying to hand off the ball in between the tackles to Jeremiah Love, he was getting hit from an inside defensive lineman before he could get to the line of scrimmage. And that's just not a sign that your O-line is working cohesively. I saw a lot of like double teams. There was one specifically I remember, double team between Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler, my two guys that came in injury relief earlier this year. And it was a straight double team to the linebacker, and neither one of them really lined up this nose guard. And the nose guard makes the play in the backfield, which should never happen if you're really going to say we need to run this ball. So inside, I felt like we were a little soft. Sam Pendleton continues to be kind of my class of the running game inside, although I love seeing Rocco Spindler when he pulls, from right to left. They do well. And then in terms of who I would say is struggling, I would say I would put our two tackles in kind of the current box of this wasn't their best game. In pass protection, Emil Wagner, he wasn't ever on the wrong assignment, but he was very soft and getting pushed back into the quarterback. There just wasn't a lot of stand your ground into his pass sets. And then Anthony Knapp is just developing some heavy hands. And I think referees are seeing that. And you can go back and forth on whether or not the Jeremiah Love touchdown should have been called back or not. But he's just a little late releasing his hands. And he's gotten, I think, 3 or 4 games this year, he's gotten pegged for at least one holding penalty. And so we're starting, those tackles did not have their best game today, but we got out with a pretty dominating win. And you're going to need those guys to continue to grow as we move forward.
Okay, so Tony and Cameron and Jeff and John Doe. Come on, John. We got our names up here. Put your real name in there. Keep the questions, unless it's Marcus Freeman. Maybe he's asking Bob a question.
Yeah.
But keep the questions coming. We'll get to them in just a minute. So I gave my game balls out, which I have to kind of decide before the game ends, because we have this show to do. And I gave my defensive game ball to Leonard Moore, I think, for the circumstance. But I'll tell you, somebody that really caught my eye throughout the game was Drake Bowen. What was your thought about Drake Bowen?
So listen, I think, again, I agree with situationally. I think, Moore did such a great job stepping in. They tried to pick on him a couple times, and that one down the sideline, just kind of a straight go route where he was in the guy's pocket. You're just like, holy cow! Like, this guy wasn't even a starting DB for Notre Dame, and he was perfect in coverage so much of today. If I'm a quarterback, I have nightmares of Drake Bowen chasing me from sideline to sideline. Whenever he wasn't blitzing, he seemed to be spying that quarterback, and I just feel like time after time after time, he was making a chase down tackle. He was hitting the quarterback as he released the ball. He always seemed to be in the right spot. And here's the thing for Drake Bowen. He was in the right spot at the right time. Earlier this year, Northern Illinois, he got beat a couple of times in pass protection where he was a step behind or he was a step late filling the gap. That was not the case today. And he just showed what kind of attitude he can bring defensively. We've been assignment sound as a defense for a long time, ever since Al Golden was our coach. But there's a nasty streak that Drake Bowen brought to the game today that I really think made certain players on Georgia Tech's offense not want to line up against him. So defensively, I think the game ball has to go to Bowen.
Okay. We will take that into account. Maybe I'll have to edit my pick later. The last thing I want to ask you before we get to viewer questions is this. Did you like Notre Dame doing the things that it did on special teams? Obviously, everybody's for the blocked field goal, but I mean the fake field goal, the fake punt. Were you in favor of that kind of aggressiveness by Marcus Freeman?
You know, I like the aggressiveness. I don't like the image that we all have now because of the announcers on ESPN saying that it was all for style points. And maybe it is, but there's just something to be said, right? Like I'm a Detroit Lions fan. You know, I kind of realigned my fandom a few years ago, and you kind of live by the Dan Campbell, you die by the Dan Campbell, but no one ever questions that that's just who he is. Marcus Freeman has been aggressive on fourth downs ever since he became the head coach at Notre Dame. He's been aggressive calling fake plays. Special teams has been a special part of Notre Dame for the past 3 seasons. So if we just have this crazy fake punt that I still can't figure out what happened, and we have the fake field goal that happens, and that's just Marcus being aggressive, I'm on board for it. If we feel like over the next 6+ weeks, we need to have style points, which I thought went out the window back with the old BCS, then I'm not for it, because I don't think if you show up and you win 27-7, people are only going to remember that score. They're not going to remember that you didn't score in the fourth quarter or whatever it might be. I think they're going to remember that you only gave up 7 points. And so I don't think we need style points if we're able to go run the table. And so that would be my point to that. I love the aggressiveness. I never want to punt. I'm not a big special teams fan in terms of when we actually kick, but if we're doing it to try and get some points for the end of the year, I don't like that mentality, and I think it'll come back to bite us eventually.
Yeah, I would say this about the broadcast, and I was here in South Bend and covering this remotely, and Tyler's down in Atlanta for us. I was disappointed with the coverage. Frankly, I didn't think those guys did their homework. They were talking about Zach Pyron. Oh, well, can he, run the ball? He's been running it all year. He's been their short yardage, red zone quarterback, and he has 4 rushing touchdowns, and he's gotten a bunch of 3rd and 4th down conversions in the red zone. It just, and I thought the whole style points thing was way off. I don't see Marcus I didn't think that that's what they were doing. I think they were trying to hold on the ball and keep Georgia Tech from getting the ball and getting back in the game. I didn't think that was okay. Let's torch them and see how many points. I've never seen Marcus Freeman do that, and I've never heard him talk about that. And I thought that was just lack of preparation on their part. There were a lot of other things that I thought they were really lacking in terms of their preparation. So that was disappointing, but they're not on ESPN very often.
Right.
And we will get a better crew hopefully next week. That game was still an either or as we went to game time today, either ABC or ESPN. So maybe we'll get them again.
Maybe again.
But we'll be back, and we're going to start doing some questions here, and we're going to start with Cameron. And Cameron said, should the running back stay in for longer stints to get more into a rhythm, or do you like the current approach? Anything you would change? Bob, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say I'm going to bounce to last week a little bit. I thought the beginning of the game was really interesting to me last week, where Jeremiah Love came in, blocked for a play. Jadarian Price ran the entire series. Then Jeremiah Love came in and blocked for a Riley Leonard touchdown. I am a massive fan of Jeremiah Love. I carry the Jeremiah Love should get 20 to 25 touches every game kind of banner just in my day-to-day life. I think he's one of the best athletes we've seen come through South Bend in a very, very long time. And so I don't feel like we're utilizing him well if we're not getting him out on the edge, getting him out in space. And I do think those touches involve, like they did in the first half, him being a check down receiver that can turn a 5-6 yard check down into a 20+ yard gain. But I would like to see, I felt like anytime Jadarian Price was going to be getting the ball, it was going to be off tackle or off end with kind of an outside zone run. And every time we were going to have Jeremiah Love run, it was going to be inside zone. And so I felt like I was able to kind of pick up on that tendency. And it seemed like the inside of the Georgia Tech defensive front was really keyed in on Jeremiah Love inside the tackles. And so I would like to see, I'm fine with the rhythm of rotation, Cameron, but I would like to see us utilize these backs with a little bit more unpredictability.
Yeah, my 2 cents worth is I'd like to see them shorten that rotation a little bit and get Love on third downs a little bit more. I do like Aeneas Williams a lot. I love Devin Ford as a person. He's one of the neatest people that I've met. He's unselfish. He moved back and forth to all these different positions in the offseason. But I don't think he is consistent enough for them. I don't think you're putting your best foot forward when he's out there in high leverage situations. I'd say bring him in when the game is a little bit more decided. Okay, let's see here. Let's go to Jeff Stevens. What grade would you give Leonard Moore today?
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead. Normally, I'm pretty I get to be a little critiquey and critical with grades, but I'm just not going to do that on this one. I think he gets an A for me. A non-starting DB to come in to play as a starting DB. He didn't miss tackles. He was there, making plays, breaking on the ball. He looked the part, not just of a D1 defensive back, but he looked like he's been in this top tier defense all season in that role. And so I feel like he's somebody that, yes, will probably have that freshman game or that freshman play or that freshman quarter at some point. But today that didn't happen. And so I'm going to give him a big old A and say, well done, young man.
Keep filling up the question queue. We got a few more minutes. We got another one from, there we go. No, I just went to the same question again. Let's see if we can get my mouse to behave. We'll blame it on the mouse. This is one from Jeff Stevens. I thought Golden's in-game adjustment after the first drive versus Stanford was great. Was this better and the best of the season?
Yeah, so I think, going back to Stanford for a quick second, I thought the first drive obviously was like, man, we can't stop anything. Second drive had a little momentum. I actually felt like things changed for us when we rotated our interior lineman. Donovan Heinisch got pressure on the Stanford quarterback, I think, in that third series, and he just looked a step fast. He looked a step faster than the other defensive lineman at that time, and at that point, it just seemed like all the momentum started going our way. So really, really great adjustments personnel-wise and scheme-wise. I would say that this was a better performance defensively. Georgia Tech averaged over 300 rushing yards the last 2 games. I know Haynes King plays a huge role in that, but their entire scheme is built on just beating teams into submission. We have not been great at stopping the run all year, and yet our scheme and our performance today made Georgia Tech one-dimensional in the phase of the game that they don't want to be in, throwing the ball, which allows our defensive line to tee off, get to the quarterback, bully him in the pocket, and it just allowed us to control the entire game and get a couple of turnovers in the process. So this arguably for me is the best defensive performance and scheme that we've had all year. But expect that to change as we go against service academies. That's a scheme-based defense that you've got to bring to those academies. And so we're going to see Al Golden kind of really in the crosshairs of what our success is in those 2 games.
For the official stats, Notre Dame outrushed Georgia Tech 168-64. Georgia Tech, the leading rushing team in the ACC, averaged 2.2 yards per carry. This is a real technical question here. Hang up the white pants for a while. What do you think? I just figure as long as there's not spaghetti stains on anything, I think it's wearable. But
I do. I have an aversion to wearing white because I'm in an Italian family and we eat pasta too much. No, here's what I'll say. I had a visceral reaction for a couple of reasons. One, I don't like the fact that we were wearing white pants. Georgia Tech was in all white. Like, I just feel like you have that little extra level of coordination. But also, I thought the white pants with the green jerseys early in the year looked absolute fire. It was unbelievable. And I think it's okay to not have a different uniform. We're not Oregon. We're not supposed to be. We're not trying to be Oregon. I would have loved to have seen just the traditional kind of, blue over or the blue over gold to go ahead and, kind of take that on. To be able to wear home unis in an away game would have been kind of an extra bonus. So hang up the white pants for the rest of the season, in my opinion, but it's not like we didn't look good in them. It's just not my preference.
Okay, another one from Jeff Stevens. ND stopped the D-line shift following the penalty on the first drive. Is the shift a bad idea or a bad officiating call?
I'm going to give my opinion on this, but I'm going to pitch. You might be more of kind of a rules lawyer than I am on this one, Eric. Back in my day, you have to deal with those kind of shifts, right? And I understand,
right.
Like cadences are a little different now and whatnot. But if the defensive line is actively and actually going to shift, like, I believe it's the onus is on the offense to not have a cadence that'll be disrupted with that kind of shift. I don't know exactly what the call was to do that. I know that in great Notre Dame defensive performances in the past, the shift has played a major role. And I hope that this refereeing and officiating emphasis of not allowing that type of call, I believe a disconcerting defensive sound, that would be problematic for me if that takes it out of our arsenal, because I think it's something you can use as a tool to confuse the offensive alignment by changing your position right before the snap.
Yeah, I thought it was a rules interpretation. I think another officiating crew might have interpreted that differently, and sometimes we get into really subjective things. Same thing with the running into the punter. That could have been a penalty because Kingston did hit their punter, but he kind of caught him. It wasn't like his leg was extended. He had landed. He kind of just caught his momentum and tried to kind of let him down. It wasn't like he stuck his forearm down and said, "Get on the ground."
Well, I agree with you. I think I posted right after that play that if the punter knew how to take the charge, that it would have been a penalty. But he was starting to lay down before there was even any contact. So I believe he literally took what would have been a penalty and made it not a penalty by starting to fall down before Kingston ever got there.
Okay, if you have a really, really good question left, ask it now. I'm going to give this one to Bob, and then we'll maybe take, if there's an award-winning question, we'll take one more. Was the pass game looking met in the second half from a lack of time in the pocket? There seemed to be some duck throws even on checkdowns. What do you think, Bob?
Yeah, Tony, I think that that is the actual term that we use for our passing game in the second half. It was very meh, right? Like it didn't seem like it was fitting. I will say this. I believe that the reason why our passing game looked stale in the second half has a lot to do with the pressure that was in and around Riley. I think that, he's shown improvement as a pocket passer, especially when he can see the ball out of his hand and on a straight line to his receiver. I think he's really good at seeing those routes and throwing him. That's why the RPO scheme works really well for him. But he had to do a lot of shuffling and shifting, kind of moving to his left or a little bit to his right and releasing the ball. And that's not his strong suit. For Riley Leonard to be successful as a passing quarterback, he's got to get rid of the ball before 2.5 seconds, or we've got to create a pretty strong pocket. And while we picked up a lot of the defensive line movement and the games that they like to do, a lot of those things were picked up after 3 yards from the line of scrimmage where they're already in the quarterback's lap. And he needs to be able to step into a throw, not just kind of rotate his hips and let it go. So I think offensive line needs to take the passing game on their shoulders. But we've seen Riley Leonard have that ability. Call it the yips, call it, just over gripping the ball, whatever it is. But sometimes, even when it looks like it should be a pretty easy throw, when he's not in rhythm, that ball, who knows where it's going to go. At least it's going to the ground right now and not sailing, because that would present a whole lot of other problems.
I think it could have been related to the white pants, but what do I know?
Tony thought the white pants looked good, though. In his opinion, they were good.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of Into the End Zone, which Bob is so happy that I learned how to pronounce the name when it's really easy. We are going to be back next week after the Navy game, undefeated Navy versus Notre Dame, which could be a top 10 team by this time next week. I'm Eric Hansen. He's Bob Quote-A-Minute Morgan, and we'll see y'all next week.
Go Irish.